Hey everyone, so with Wano Act 2 ending and the Fire Festival about to start, I know that the title of this video might not make any sense. After all, we're almost 50 chapters into Wano and the final battle is about to start. So what, am I saying that the final battle is going to span like 150 chapters? No, of course not. That's why, to start with, I'm going to quickly explain why the Fire Festival is very likely not going to be the final battle, before getting into just how huge I believe Wano is actually set to be. So, for longtime viewers, you know I put out a video several months back explaining why the Fire Festival would not be the final battle, and now I am more sure of that than ever. For new viewers, let me quickly sum up my explanation just very quickly from that video. So, general rule in storytelling in general, if the story is going to end in success for the main characters, then the story has to hit a low point for them, somewhere along the way first, right? So at least that's the case for most well-written stories, because a low point is necessary for there to be struggle, for there to be drama, a point from which the hero or heroes can then rally back from and ultimately achieve their goals, okay? So, and One Piece follows this rule pretty religiously. Like, it's throughout the series. The low point usually is in One Piece after the initial mission the crew has fails. And what I mean is, the crew will usually attempt to accomplish a plan towards the beginning of an arc, and then when they fail or are defeated, that's when we hit an emotional low point, after which there will be a tonal shift where everything gets more serious and everyone becomes more driven to succeed the next time around. That has not happened in Wano yet. And that's pretty crazy to think about, just considering how long Wano is at this point already. Like, if you compare it to Alabasta, in Alabasta it only took about 10 chapters for the crew to try to execute their first mission to stop Crocodile. If you look at Whole Cake Island, their first attempt to get Sanji back was like 20 chapters in. Dressrosa pretty much started right away with the crew trying to execute their mission to take down Doflamingo from the get-go. But in Wano, we're almost 50 chapters in, and we are only now getting to their initial attempt to take down Kaido. Now, you could argue that Luffy losing to Kaido early on was that moment of failure, but that doesn't really fit. That loss didn't really make for the low point of the arc, because the arc had just barely begun, and it didn't cause any sort of tonal shift. Like, a similar case would be something more like Luffy's initial loss to Aokiji, a bad loss early on, but one that everyone was able to pretty quickly brush off, not a significant, emotional low point or tonal shift for the arc. And more importantly, Luffy losing to Kaido right away wasn't the Alliance as a whole failing in their mission. This was just Luffy being an idiot by himself. Now, you could also maybe argue that Yasu's death was the low point of the arc, since it did happen at a point where the mission overall was in danger of failing, and it did cause, a momentary tonal shift that affected many of the main characters. However, still, there was never any sort of true mission failure or defeat that took place here. And really, all it turned out to be was actually a pretty big win for the Alliance overall. So pretty much a net positive in reality. So that tells me that the true point of failure and emotional low point of the arc is still yet to come. Also, just looking at the key plot points so far, there are a lot of small things that indicate to me that Wano is not ending with this raid on Onigashima, because there's just missing loose threads here and there. So Nekomamushi and Denjiro are still unaccounted for. It doesn't seem like Kid and his group are going to be involved in the raid. It also sounds like Zoro and Momo both still have a lot more room to grow this arc. It seems like a lot of the main cast is being portrayed as overconfident about the raid, and with the traitor in the mix, as well as the new alliance between Kaido and Big Mom, the Straw Hat Alliance is likely in for a bad surprise. So that all fits with the story structure of a kabuki play, in that Act 3 is generally the most dramatic point of the story, usually marked by a great moment of tragedy. So all that suggests to me that a major failure in the raid on Onigashima fits. So, all that being said, going on the assumption that the Fire Festival is not going to be the end of the arc, then why do I think it's going to end up being so long? Like, 200 chapters is still really long. Well, based on everything leading up to this arc should be an absolutely unprecedented length for the series. Because never have we ever had a storyline with this much build-up in One Piece. Everything we've seen from Punk Hazard to Dressrosa to Zou has all been leading up to this arc. All of those arcs were one gigantic continuing plot thread that is now culminating in this arc. And Oda has been showing us this over and over, reminding us that massive 100-chapter long arc Dressrosa, that was a midway plot point to this arc. Like, we've been climbing up this ladder of villains from Caesar to Doflamingo to now finally the top rung Kaido, which was spelled out from us from day one of the New World. Like, for comparison, think of Marineford. So by pre-time skip standards, that conflict had a lot of buildup, since we had this ongoing plotline in the background of Ace chasing Whitebeard, and finally that buildup turned into the Marineford War. But in Wano's case, it hasn't been like a small background plot that has led up to this. So this mission to take down Kaido has been like the driving force of the entire storyline of the New World. Almost every major plot development has been built up to this event. So when Oda and his editors say Wano should make Marineford look cute, yes, based on in-story build-up, it should be way, way, way bigger. Now, still, I know you might be thinking that even if it's bigger than any other arc so far, that doesn't mean it's going to be 200 chapters long. After all, no other arc in One Piece has been anywhere near that big. And yes, that's true. But there's not really any point in comparing it to other One Piece arcs, since almost no other One Piece arcs are written like this. It's not really a one-to-one comparison. For example, if we were to take like 3 long pre-time skip arcs, so like Alabasta, Skypiea, and Enies Lobby, think how fundamentally different those types of stories were to Wano. Those were storylines that were fairly short, taking place over, 2 to 3 days, over a few days. The cast of characters was always small, generally focusing on the Straw Hats and only 1 to 2 other groups, and usually only really focusing on a few members of those other groups. In terms of plot lines, most arcs pre-time skip were very tight. The crew was only ever split up into 2, maybe 3 groups for the most part, which meant only a few running plot lines besides, of course, the finale where everyone splits up to get their own, 1v1s before coming back together. So Wano is completely different in that this is a storyline that spans at least 2 weeks, and very possibly a month, based on Hawkins' statement. The cast of characters is absolutely ridiculously huge, with a lot of different groups to focus on. There are a lot of characters that are being treated as individually significant, like Momo, Komurasaki, Hyogoro, Kid, Hawkins, and so many more characters all have their own storylines. You have to get down to characters like Otsuru and Hitetsu before we can really start labeling characters as, minor characters. And of course that means that we have a tremendous amount of plot lines going on, many of which have wrapped up for Act 2, but even just starting off Act 3, we can see that plot lines are already splitting off again. So really the only other arc that is structured somewhat similarly to Wano is Dressrosa. That's the only fair comparison. That's an arc that also had a lot of characters, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of separate running plot threads, as opposed to the tighter, more focused plot lines and casts of the average arc. So when an arc has a more complex structure, it's naturally going to be a lot longer than traditional arcs, which is why Dressrosa was 100 chapters. Now, what's really crazy is that if you compare Wano to Dressrosa, it looks like Dressrosa is basically a mini version of Wano. Seeing as Dressrosa is a lead-up storyline to Wano, it makes sense that Oda would attempt a sort of trial run at this complex style of writing an arc before attempting the much more ambitious Wano. These are both storylines where the Straw Hats join forces with the people of the country to stage a rebellion. But Dressrosa is pretty condensed. Here the rebel forces are very few, we are dropped in right on the moment that the rebellion is already starting, the setting is really small, and it's all happening in one day. In Wano, Oda is getting to play out that rebellion storyline to its fullest. So like here, the initial planning phase takes place over multiple weeks. We see characters have to perform stealth missions, they have to gather information, they have to get weapons, recruit people, there are hostages, there are territory battles, etc., etc. It's basically taken us 50 chapters just to finally get to the mission. And to really give a picture of just how much bigger this plot is compared to the prototype that was Dressrosa, I like to think in terms of internal and external characters. Not really a technical term, but an easy way for me to personally categorize. So I personally call internal characters those that are organically part of the island storyline, meaning their story is bound to the storyline of the island. In Dressrosa, that was basically characters like Kiros, Riku, Rebecca, Viola, and the Tontadas, so not really that many. External characters are outside characters who got involved in the island storyline, so Cavendish, Bartolomeo, all the other Colosseum fighters, and then of course Sabo, Koala, Fujitora, and those guys. For comparison, you could say that Alabasta only had a few external characters, so Smoker, Tashigi, and Ace. Now, what's insane about Wano is that right now, just the cast of internal characters alone is already comparable to the size of Dressrosa's entire cast, internal and external combined. So there's the 9 scabbards, of course, but even beyond them, there are so many significant natives of Wano. Now, on top of this, external characters have already started seeping in. We obviously have, the Supernovas and the Big Mom Pirates, but it's not crazy to speculate that more characters could arrive, because possibilities include, more Big Mom Pirates, Jinbei and the Sun Pirates, other Supernovas, the Marines, Marco and the Whitebeard Remnants. Like, how many characters are there that we could reasonably speculate could make an appearance in Wano? Obviously, not all of those options are going to show up, but the point is that we are already dealing with a cast bigger than anything we've ever had, and it's mostly just internal characters so far. Like, even if the Straw Hat Grand Fleet shows up, that alone is basically like adding the majority of the external cast from Dressrosa. So, all of that is to say that I expect Wano to be a really, really ridiculously long arc. I think everything we've had up to this point was really just laying the groundwork, and now the real plot is only just beginning. And lastly, if you enjoyed this video, then you can definitely, like, share, and subscribe. You can join my Patreon for weekly chapter reviews and Extended Thoughts podcast. More Wano videos coming next week.